Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something kind of creepy. Today we're tackling the unconscious mind, all thanks to this book, before you know it. John Barg, the author, he's like the expert on all this subconscious stuff.
Yeah, he's done tons of research on how much of our lives is basically run by this hidden autopilot system in our
That's
brains.
kind of freaky when you think about it. Like, we assume we're making all these conscious decisions, but really there's this whole other force at work behind the scenes.
Totally. And it's not always easy to spot. It's not like we're walking around thinking, oh, there's my unconscious making me crave a donut.
Right. It's all happening under the surface, influencing our thoughts, feelings, actions. So how does Bart convince us this is actually a thing? I mean, what kind of evidence does he have?
Oh, he's got tons of cool studies and examples. One that always blows my mind is this research by a neuroscientist named Gazaniga. He was studying these split brain patients, people who had the connection between the two halves of their brain surgically cut.
Wait, so like their left brain and their right brain couldn't talk to each other anymore?
Exactly. And what they found was that these patients would do things with one hand, like pick up an object, totally unaware they were doing it.
No way. So they're just going about their day and boom, their hand is grabbing stuff.
Yep. Because the other half of their brain was actually the one initiating the action. It's like their conscious mind was totally out of the loop.
That's wild. Okay, but then what happens? Someone asks, why did you grab that? What do
Ah,
they say?
that's the best part. They come up with these perfectly logical explanations for their actions, except the explanations are total BS. Their unconscious mind is basically creating a cover story on the spot.
So it's like our unconscious is this master storyteller, always trying to make sense of our actions, even if we don't know the real reason behind them.
Precisely. And that just goes to show how powerful our unconscious is in shaping our perceptions and behaviors.
Okay, so where does Barg say all these unconscious influences come from? Like what shapes this hidden part of ourselves?
Well, he talks about these three time zones that shape our unconscious, almost like layers of influence. You've got our evolutionary past, all that ancient wiring we inherited from our ancestors.
So like our caveman instincts are still running the show.
In a way, yeah. Then there's our forgotten childhood, all those early experiences that shaped our brains without us even realizing it.
Makes sense. We're like little sponges when we're kids, absorbing everything.
Exactly. And then the third time zone is our invisible future, all our goals, our motivations, those things we're striving for.
Hold on. So you're saying that our past, our present, and our future are all jumbled up in our unconscious, influencing each other.
Exactly. And these time zones are constantly interacting, shaping our thoughts, feelings, and actions in the present moment.
Okay, I need an example. How is our evolutionary past still playing out in our lives today?
Think about disgust, that feeling you get when you see something gross. Bark says that disgust response, which evolved to protect us from germs and disease, can unconsciously influence our political views.
Wait, what? My political opinions are influenced by my sense of smell.
In a way, yeah. There was a study at Yale during a flu outbreak. Researchers primed some students with thoughts about getting sick just by having them read a news article about the flu.
Okay, so they're thinking about germs and stuff. Then what?
Then they had these same students answer a survey about immigration. And guess what? The students who'd been thinking about the flu were way harsher on immigration compared to a group that hadn't read the article.
Whoa. So even something as random as a flu outbreak can tap into our ancient survival mechanisms and mess with our views on complex issues.
Exactly. It's like our unconscious is saying, danger, protect the tribe, even if the threat isn't real.
Wow. Okay, so that's how our evolutionary past influences us. But what about childhood? How do those early experiences shape our unconscious?
Our brains are super flexible when we're young, especially in those first few years. And a lot of the learning we do then happens implicitly without us even realizing it.
Yeah, I can barely remember what I did yesterday, let alone what I was learning as a toddler.
Exactly. But even if we don't consciously remember those early experiences, they can still be shaping our unconscious beliefs and attitudes even years later.
Okay, I think I get it, but give me an example. How does this implicit learning actually play out when we're kids?
There's this crazy study about stereotypes about gender and math. Turns out these stereotypes can show up in kids as young as 5. They had these kids do a simple math test. But before the test, they subtly primed some of the girls by having them color in pictures of girls wearing dresses.
Ah, okay, so they're priming them with this stereotypical image of what girls are supposed to be like, right?
Right. And then they had another group of girls color in pictures of animals, which was just a neutral activity.
So did this little coloring exercise actually affect how these girls did on a math test?
Believe it or not, yeah. The girls who colored the girls in dresses pictures, they actually did worse on the math test compared to the girls who colored animals.
Get out. You're
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
Just coloring a picture was enough to impact their math performance.
It's wild, right? And the thing is, when they did the same study with preschoolers, they found the same pattern. These stereotypes were already there, unconsciously influencing what these kids thought they were capable of.
That's both fascinating and kind of disturbing. Shows how important it is to be aware of the messages we're sending kids, even subtly, because they're soaking it all up.
For sure. It's a big responsibility. We've got to be mindful of what we're teaching kids about what they're supposed to be good at.
Okay, so we've covered our evolutionary past and our childhoods. Now, what about that third time zone Barg talks about, the invisible future? How can something that hasn't even happened yet influence us right now?
This is where it gets really interesting. Our goals, our aspirations, all those things we're working towards, they can have a huge impact on our thoughts, feelings, and even our actions right now.
So you mean like my dream of finally writing a novel is somehow affecting how I see the world at this very moment?
In a way, yeah. Our unconscious is always scanning the environment, looking for anything related to our goals, even when we're not aware of it.
Okay, I'm going to need an example here. What does this unconscious goal-seeking look like in action?
Ever been at a loud party, deep in conversation, and yet somehow you still hear your name mentioned across the room?
Oh yeah, totally. It's like my ears perk up, even though I'm trying to focus on something else.
That's a classic example of something called the cocktail party effect. Basically, even when we're focused on one thing, our unconscious is still listening for things that are important to us, like our name.
So our unconscious is like this superpowered filter picking out the important stuff from all the noise.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
always working behind the scenes, even when we're not aware of it.
And this isn't just at parties, right?
No, it's happening all the time. It's why we might suddenly notice more red cars on the road when we're thinking about buying a red car, or why we're more likely to remember things that support what we already believe.
So it's like we're wearing these gold-colored glasses that change how we see the world.
That's a great way to put it. Our unconscious is always looking for information that confirms what we already believe and helps us reach our goals. And sometimes this can lead to some pretty interesting and maybe even problematic behaviors.
Okay, I need an example. When does this unconscious goal chasing go from helpful to kind of messed up?
Let's say you really want this specific new car, but logically you know it's not the smartest choice. Maybe it's expensive, not great on gas mileage, and you don't really need a new car.
But you really, really want it. I've been there. Then what happens?
Well, your unconscious, being the little enabler that it is, starts feeding you all these reasons why buying that car is actually a good idea.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's like, I deserve this, or it'll be great for road trips, even if you haven't taken one in years.
Exactly. Our unconscious is a master at rationalizing. It's like that friend who tells you it's totally fine to have another slice of cake, even though you both know you shouldn't.
It's scary how accurate that is. I've definitely fallen for my unconscious's smooth talk a few times.
We all have. The key is to become aware of these unconscious patterns so we can start making more conscious choices.
Okay, so how do we do that? What are some practical steps we can take to harness the power of our unconscious instead of letting it run the show? Okay, so how do we do that? What are some practical steps we can take to harness the power of our unconscious instead of letting it run the show?
Well, one of the most powerful tools Barg talks about is something called implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds a little intimidating, like something out of a self-help manual. What does that even mean?
It's actually a really simple idea, but super effective. Basically, instead of just setting a vague goal, like I want to be more productive, you create a specific plan for how you're going to do it.
So instead of just wishing I'd work out more, I'd say something like, when I get home from work tomorrow, I'm heading straight to the gym.
Exactly. You're linking the behavior you want, in this case going to the gym, to a specific cue getting home from work. It's like creating a mental shortcut that bypasses that whole willpower struggle.
So I'm kind of like pre-programming my unconscious, telling it what to do, so I'm not stuck in a battle of wills with myself every evening.
You got it. And the research on this is amazing. There was this study where they used implementation intentions to help elderly patients remember to take their medication.
Oh, that's huge. I can barely remember to take my vitamins, and I only have to take those like once a day.
Right. So in this study, the researchers had these patients create a specific plan, something like, When I put my coffee cup on the counter each morning, I'll take my pills. And just that simple mental link made a big difference. The patients who used these implementation intentions were way more likely to take their meds correctly.
That's so smart. So simple, but so effective. But this doesn't just work for taking pills, right? It seems like this could apply to all sorts of things we want to do more consistently.
Absolutely. They've even used implementation intentions to get people to vote.
Wait, seriously? How do you use mind tricks to get people to the polls?
Well, they help people connect the goal of voting with a specific time and place. So instead of that vague, I really should vote feeling, they'd encourage people to say, after I drop the kids off at school tomorrow, I'm stopping by the polling place on my way home.
That's brilliant. You're not just hoping you'll remember to vote, you're actually building it into your routine.
Exactly. And it worked. People who used these implementation intentions were significantly more likely to actually cast their votes.
Okay, I'm sold. Implementation intentions are like a superpower for getting stuff done. But can they also help us resist those unwanted unconscious influences? Like those times when I find myself reaching for the junk food, even though I know I shouldn't.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. Research shows implementation intentions can totally help us resist temptations.
Okay, so walk me through this. If I'm trying to eat healthier, would I just tell myself, if I see a cookie, I'll just walk away?
It's a little more nuanced than that. It's about planning your response to those tempting situations before they happen. So maybe instead of just avoiding cookies altogether, which honestly might make you want them even more, you could say to yourself, if someone offers me a cookie, I'll say, thanks, but I'm good. I'm trying to eat healthier.
So it's like having an escape route planned out in advance, so I'm not caught off guard and reaching for the cookie before I even realize what I'm doing.
Exactly. And it can be surprisingly effective. Just having that pre-rehearsed response can make a huge difference.
Okay, this is making me feel so much more empowered.
Yeah.
It's like we're not just victims of our unconscious impulses. We can actually learn to work with them.
That's the key. It's not about being afraid of our unconscious minds. It's about understanding how they work so we can use that knowledge to our advantage.
So implementation intentions are great for forming habits and resisting temptation, but are there other ways we can work with our unconscious, so to speak?
Absolutely. Another big takeaway from Barg's book is the power of our environment. He talks about how the things we surround ourselves with, the information we consume, even the places we spend our time, they all subtly influence our unconscious minds.
This is making me think about that mere exposure effect we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
How just being exposed to something repeatedly, even if it's kind of random, like a song on the radio, can make us like it more.
Exactly. That same principle applies to all kinds of things, not just music. It can affect our preferences for food, for people, for all sorts of things. It's like familiarity breeds fondness, even if we're not consciously aware of it happening.
Okay, that's really interesting. So if I'm trying to, say, make meditation a regular part of my routine, it's not enough to just think about doing it. I should actually create a space in my home that's dedicated to meditation, like a comfy corner with a cushion and maybe some candles. Would that make my unconscious more receptive to the whole idea?
That's a great example. If you want to make something a habit, make it easy on your unconscious mind. Surround yourself with cues that support your goals.
I love that. So it's not about controlling every little thing in my environment, but just being more mindful about how my space affects my mind.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our unconscious minds are constantly picking up on cues from our surroundings, and we can use that to help us achieve our goals.
This is all so fascinating, but it makes me wonder, if our environment is so influential, does that mean we're all just products of our surroundings?
Right.
Do we even have free will?
That's a big question, right? One that philosophers have been debating for centuries. But Barg's perspective is really interesting. He argues that understanding the unconscious doesn't take away our free will. He actually thinks it enhances it.
Wait, really? How does that work? It seems kind of counterintuitive.
Think of it this way. Imagine you're learning to drive a car. If you don't know how the engine works, you're pretty limited in what you can do, right? You can press the gas and the brakes, but you're not really in control. But once you understand the mechanics, you can troubleshoot problems, you can fine-tune the engine, you can really push that car to its limits.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So understanding our unconscious is like understanding how the engine of our mind works.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have this incredibly powerful system at our disposal, and once we understand how it operates, we can start making more conscious choices about where we want to go.
This is making me think about all those times I felt stuck in a rut, just going through the motions.
Hmm.
Maybe that was my unconscious calling the shots because I wasn't paying attention.
It's definitely easy to get stuck on autopilot, but the more aware we become of these unconscious influences, the more we can start to steer ourselves in the right direction.
So it's really about awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to notice the patterns.
Exactly. And Barg talks about how important it is to be curious about those patterns. When do you tend to make decisions you later regret? What situations bring out the best in you? What situations tend to trigger those not so great reactions?
So it's like being a detective of our own minds, looking for clues about how our unconscious is shaping our experiences.
I love that analogy. And the more clues we gather, the more power we have to change. We can use those implementation intentions to create new, healthier habits. We can tweak our environment to support our goals. We can even start to challenge our own deeply held beliefs if we need to.
That's incredible. But I have to be honest, it also sounds like a lot of work. Is it really possible to rewire our brains like that?
It's definitely a journey, not a quick fix, but it's a journey worth taking because as we get to know our unconscious minds, we get to know ourselves on a much deeper level. We become more aware of our motivations, our values, even our fears. And that awareness is incredibly powerful.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to talk about the role our everyday experiences play in all of this. We've talked about how our past shapes our unconscious and how our goals influence it. But what about those everyday moments, those fleeting encounters, the things we're exposed to constantly? How do they fit into the picture?
That's such an important question. It's like we're swimming in a sea of information, news, social media, conversations, and our poor unconscious minds are trying to make sense of it all.
We've talked a lot about how our past and our goals shape our unconscious. But what about the here and now? How do our everyday experiences, the things we're exposed to constantly, influence this hidden world inside our minds?
That's a fantastic question. It's like we're swimming in a sea of information, news, social media, conversations, and our poor unconscious minds are trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And it's not just the big stuff, right? It feels like even those seemingly insignificant moments, those fleeting encounters, those random things we see and hear throughout the day, they're all subtly shaping our unconscious.
You're absolutely right. And one of the key ways this happens is through a process called priming.
Priming. Didn't we talk about that earlier with the experiment where just coloring a picture of a girl in a dress affected how well those little girls did on a math test?
Exactly. That was a powerful example of priming in action. It's basically this idea that exposure to certain stimuli, words, images, sensations can activate related concepts or behaviors in our unconscious mind, making them more likely to influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Okay, so give me a real-world example
Yeah.
of priming something that happens outside of a research lab.
Let's say you're walking down the street and you pass by a bakery. The smell of freshly baked bread walks out, and suddenly you find yourself craving a croissant, even though you weren't even thinking about food before. That's priming.
Ah, so my nose is in cahoots with my unconscious. It's like that smell triggered a whole cascade of associations: warmth, comfort, indulgence, and now I'm craving a pastry. I'm starting to see how easily our unconscious minds can be swayed.
Exactly. It's happening all the time, often without us even realizing it. Think about those times you've hummed along to a song totally unconsciously just because you heard it earlier that day. Or how about those moments when you catch yourself using the same phrases or mannerisms as someone you've been spending a lot of time with? Those are all examples of priming.
That's incredible. It's like our unconscious minds are these sponges soaking up everything around us, even when we're not consciously paying attention. It's making me rethink my whole morning commute. Maybe listening to that true crime podcast isn't the best way to start my day if I want to feel calm and focused.
You're starting to see the power of priming. It's not about becoming hypervigilant, constantly analyzing every little thing you're exposed to. It's about having a greater awareness of the subtle ways our environment shapes our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
This is reminding me of something else Barg talks about in the book, Life Lingers. This idea that our recent experiences can have this kind of afterglow, unconsciously coloring how we perceive and react in the present moment.
That's a great connection. And it's a perfect example of how these seemingly fleeting moments can have a lasting impact on our unconscious. Barg actually did this fascinating experiment where he had people ride an exercise bike.
Okay, I'm intrigued but also a little confused. What does riding a bike have to do with our unconscious?
Well, as you might expect, riding a bike gets your heart rate up. It triggers that physiological arousal response. But here's the fascinating part. They found that people who had just finished exercising were more likely to misattribute that arousal to other sources.
What do you mean by misattribute? Like, they thought they were having a heart attack because they were out of shape.
Not quite. In one version of the experiment, they actually gave participants mild electric shocks after they had been exercising.
Electric shocks. That sounds a little intense for a research study.
Don't worry, they were very mild. The point was that the participants who had been exercising rated those shocks as less painful than those who hadn't been exercising. That's wild. So it's like their brains were saying, well, my heart is racing, but it must be because of those shocks, not because I was just pedaling furiously on that bike.
Exactly. It's like the physical sensations from the exercise lingered, creating this afterglow that unconsciously influenced how they perceived the pain.
This whole life lingers thing is blowing my mind. It makes you realize how much our recent experiences, even those that seem totally unrelated, can color our perceptions and reactions. It's like our unconscious minds are these echo chambers, where the echoes of our past experiences continue to reverberate in the present moment.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it highlights how interconnected our minds and bodies really are. Our physical sensations, our emotional states, our past experiences, they're all swirling around in this unconscious soup, influencing how we experience the world.
This is making me think about all the ways our moods and emotions are affected by things we don't even consciously register. Like how on a sunny day, everything just seems a little bit brighter. But when it's gray and gloomy outside, it's harder to shake off that feeling of lethargy. That's a great example. There's actually research showing that weather can unconsciously influence our moods, which can then impact everything from our stock market decisions to our views on climate change.
Wow, so next time I make a risky investment on a sunny day, I can just blame it on my unconscious. But seriously, this is making me realize how much I'm at the mercy of my own subconscious.
That's where you're wrong. Remember, understanding the unconscious isn't about feeling powerless. It's about recognizing the invisible forces at play so we can make more conscious choices.
That's a great reminder. It's like knowledge is power. The more we understand about how our unconscious minds work, the more we can harness that power to create the life we want. This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about this hidden world inside my own head.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to our listeners, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to pay a little more attention to the subtle cues and influences that might be shaping your own unconscious. Remember, it's not about being scared of these hidden forces. It's about harnessing their power to create a more conscious, fulfilling, and meaningful life. Until next time.